pleasure to be welcoming you to this final pre-concert conversation of the year. And we actually get to have a conversation in the same room. It's wonderful. And very soon, we're actually going to be able to do this on the stage at the Pastoral again and see all of you in person. And we absolutely can't wait. But this is it's still a gigantic step forward.
I know. Isn't it wonderful?
Yes. I mean, we do see each other fairly often at rehearsals and things, but it's still so great to actually be able to interact in person.
True.
Yeah. So we've chosen this really unusual program to end the year. We're pairing this wonderful string serenade by George Antheil and Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. So George Antheil, I mean, a name that, just a few decades ago was very much kind of at the top of the list of composers and now almost never played. So how did the name of Antheil kind of come across your kind of brainstorming session?
Well, hello everybody. I'm just so excited to see. I could almost touch you. But we're keeping, as you see, we're keeping social distancing.
Exactly.
Still. George Antheil, the bad boy of classical music, huh? That's
the self-styled bad boy. That's a little bit of a...
Actually, it's l'enfant terrible.
Oh yeah, that sounds so much better.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like bad boy with a style. So, I used to be a musical advisor for the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, very fine chamber orchestra, and we're looking for things outside of the box.
Yes.
We would do like the Berg orchestra version of the Lyric Suite, and we do all kinds of things like Shostakovich 14th, and we're doing a program of American music. So we're doing Kernes, we're doing Copland. Like Copland was the most well-known composer on the program, and I came across this symphony by Antheil. And because I only knew, like a lot of people know him as the famous Enfant Terrible with the ballet mécanique, right? Ballet mécanique is for like instruments we don't use normally in the orchestra, right?
Yeah, so we very rarely brought airplane propellers on stage, for instance.
It was written in a period of Dadaism. It was a Cubism also. So if you compare that to the art at that time in the 20s, something that was after they've gone through a pandemic and everybody was going absolutely like crazy with the arts and with everything. I don't know if it rings a bell, but you had all these different currents coming in, and Antheil was a little bit no, I wouldn't say like Charles Ives, but that influenced also Ives in the later part of his career, because Ives was pretty traditional at the beginning. But all these essays, all these trying out new things, and just no barriers, just trying new things. So he had all these things, like you said, airplane propeller. That's kind of weird. But he also wrote just chamber music and symphonies and things like that. So I went and I looked into that for that program I did a few years back, and the symphony was it was very bizarre. It was like a little bit like Copland meeting Shostakovich, meeting all these different influences. And I thought, because I always want us to play as much American music as possible. And I like to program a lot of American music, and not just new music, but music that is forgotten a little bit, but that should be brought to the forefront of the stage. And I thought this symphony really deserves a place. I remember doing it then. It was very popular also with the, people came in and said Antheil. They came in for, let's say, Appalachian Spring or something like that. Yeah. And then when the concert finished, they were like, oh, this is a wonderful piece. Yeah. And so I wanted to program it for our concert. So 2 symphonies. Finishing the year with 2 works, no soloists, just featuring the orchestra, featuring our wonderful players, and also celebrating that they've done so much, and you guys have been there all year long, on stage for the public, and just let's have a celebration of music together. So I want to have 2 symphonies, 1 American and 1 more standard.
It's funny, you talked about all of these influences that George Antheil has in his music, and really his life story, it's almost like a Forrest Gump life story, where like he just seems to find himself in these amazing situations and interacting with amazing people. So I'm just going to do a very quick detour, just because it's really it's like a rejected film plot. Like first of all, George Antheil's a stage name. He had actually been born with the name Carl Johann, which is really a great composer name. But but then when he was in Paris, he was hanging out with the likes of James Joyce and Eric Satie, and then he, decided, you know what, I don't just want to be a famous musician, I'll do some writing. So he wrote a treatise on glandular endocrinology. He wrote advice columns as a relationship columnist for Esquire magazine.
Yeah.
And he wrote this story called Death in the Dark. And he got some friends of his to edit this murder mystery. And these are people like Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot edited his murder mystery. And then, on the side, I guess he would write a little music, and he wrote music for a play by W.B. Yeats, and he wrote music for Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. He wrote music for these movies that starred, Cary Grant and Frank Sinatra. And then, of course, he wrote the string serenade. Yeah. And it's just insane to me that he has all of these wonderful influences and loves all of these futurist sorts of things, and then he's writing this piece for instruments that haven't really changed in hundreds of years.
And it's and chronologically, nothing makes sense.
Totally
it's like you would think this is written 20 years before. Yeah, it's just how he felt about something.
Yeah.
They had less barriers. I keep saying in those days. Like for example, we're talking about the guy who was an insurance salesman. Sorry,
Charles Ives.
Charles Ives. Charles Ives.
Yeah.
He became a world-class, renowned in insurance sales, and you could have many careers, and we can do that now more also.
Yeah.
But there was a part in the 20th century where you had to be a specialist of everything you do. Still a little bit, but it's not as bad as the 1980s, 1990s. But you could be like, there's certain things that comes from having more humanity in the sense that experiencing other things in life, and when you come to music, it's something very special. Yeah. So for him, each time he wrote a piece, it was something special. And it's funny because this serenade, sorry I said symphony, but this serenade is special in the sense that it's in the middle of a bunch of other things that were like really out there, avant-garde, and then he writes the precious symphony there, serenade, and like you said, it's pretty like standard for him, to go and to write that, and it's beautiful. It's actually very tricky for the orchestra, I have to say. It's very tricky for the players, but it's
don't worry, we already know.
Yeah.
It is actually one of the things that Antal does a lot is he really likes to expand the range of the instruments. So violins are playing right at the top of the fingerboard, and it's the first violins. The second violinists get to support underneath, so we're much happier.
But there's always this trend of music that has to do with it's like you feel there's something in motion. You feel industrialization a little bit. There's always a bit of industrialization in this music.
There is a groove to this music.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
there's a groove.
It's like not really. A lot of it made me think of Shostakovich, but Shostakovich is more of a square, classical groove. This has a little. You can hear it's American music.
Absolutely.
There's a certain real groove to it, but with the melodic lines that are really interesting. No, anyway, you'll be the judge of it, and hopefully you enjoy it. Yeah.
It's funny. We talked about how this is really kind of around the idea of two symphonies. And the String Serenade has one movement too few.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Beethoven's Sixth Symphony gets that extra movement in there.
True.
So we have this 5-movement symphony. And now, we're going to step back a little bit in time and think about winter of 2019. And we're planning this great season, and we're going to start the season with Beethoven Symphony after Beethoven Symphony after Beethoven Symphony. And instead, we weren't able to do that for reasons we don't need to belabor now. But we are now ending the year with a Beethoven Symphony. And you chose this one. Why?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this one is about harvest. This one is about going through all that we go through, and at the end having a very beautiful harvest, beautiful ending. Yeah. And I think we're aiming towards that. It's summer also, and it feels like it just felt right to have that one. We could have. It's not the one that ends with the apotheose and the big forte, but it's one that's really meaningful for where we are in our society right now, in general. You mentioned about the symphonies, 3 movements in one, but symphonies weren't always supposed to be in in a 4-movement format, right? So you had some Mozart symphonies that were in 3 movements because of the city they were written for. In Paris, it was very popular to have symphonies with 3 movements, and Prague also.
Yeah.
So, and Beethoven, it's very different. He didn't write for anybody in his head, right? He said, this is what I hear, this is what I see, and this is the human experience that I want to share with you. And that's another reason to start and to end with Beethoven. It's a little bit for us, as you said, we were thinking of having a full year, or well, at least a 20 part, 2020 part of the year with Beethoven, starting the year with all these wonderful symphonies. And we felt that, the public, we want to share with you the most well-known ones, at least in our season. And the 6th, of course, the Pastoral is one of those. It was not at all appropriate in a time of a lot of drama and where we needed a lot of energy at the beginning of this crisis. But as we work, hopefully, towards a resolution, you feel that, although there is a storm in the Pastoral, we go through, it's a little bit like saying it's just a recap of everything we've lived, going towards something very positive at the end.
It is, and I think when I listen to this symphony, I listen to the second movement much differently now than I did before the pandemic, because there is this sense, because that sense of repose, that sense of kind of escape has been so hard to find.
Yeah, true.
And now for Beethoven, it was something that he had to specifically go outdoors to find, and it was very mindful. He would do this to try to find that peace. And that was something I never really maybe understood in my own life until after the pandemic, or like kind of as we're emerging from that. I listened to the second movement with entirely different ears.
That second movement, it brings so much joy, but peace at the same time. It's like a peaceful passion. It's like and joy, and there's something very special. First of all, it sounds very simple. It's like, oh wow, this is just going. As everything in Beethoven sounds simple, it's not simple to play, but it's basically his soul is talking to your soul,
Yes.
and it's direct. And what you said is interesting. Maybe we have some of our listeners that will also feel the same as you feel there. But for sure, we took more time this year and a half, to live, because we didn't have a choice, because you could go and do all that. But after a while, everything slows down. Life slowed down. And it was not the plan, but there's many bad things that happened with the pandemic. But one thing about slowing down life a little bit is that you can have an outlook that's different, and you take the time to hear and to listen and to exchange in a way that's sometimes deeper and slower. It's not like we're like this all the time. It's like, so listening to slow movements of Beethoven symphonies is a little bit different right now. Be it the 9th, be it the 6th, be it, not the 5th is different. It always moves a little bit. But this one is very, very special. So we start, the first movement has some action in it. They each have kind of a title and a purpose, right?
Yeah. So we're not going to delve deeply in each one of the movements, but I really think that last pairing of movements, the storm leading into the kind of the music of thankfulness after the storm, and gratitude after the storm, that's something that hits home in a very different way now than it might have done when we were first thinking about it in the winter of 2019. It was just simply one of the symphonies that we would be doing, and now it feels very much of this moment. So, maybe talk a little bit about maybe that storm scene, maybe how that music hits you now, and then maybe how that fifth movement hits.
Well, being in Canada pretty much all year, not being able to come and say, there's a storm, yes, there's a storm of, for some people, real physical suffering, but there's also a storm of frustration that we've had. There's a storm of worrying, there's all of it, because it builds up, right? So when it builds up, and you hear in this movement, at a certain point, there's the how do you say, le tonnerre, the thunder hits, and Beethoven, all of a sudden, he puts trombones, which didn't have trombones until then. Well, he has trombones in the fifth, but he was the first one to use trombones in the symphony, in a symphony.
But we forgive him anyway.
But don't do that again. But but we get to that storm movement, and he needs extra strength. He needs piccolo, and then we need the timpani is really sharp, and then we're gonna add some trombone. So to have that, so he has that sound and comes and gets you. It sounds, I'm talking orchestration, but what we're really talking is emotion, and is a sound that will be a bit more piercing, a sound that will be bigger, and that will be more imposing, and that culminates to that, and then it brings you to that. So yeah, so for me it was a lot of frustration, I have to say, but it's not exactly the emotion, it's the build up over the build up over the build up. Everybody felt something this year. It's different, very different. I was super lucky, nobody in my family got COVID, nobody was sick, but some people, for them it was dramatic, you know. So this brings it even more, you know. But at the end, you know, like finally, you know, you're able to go back to a life. I'm not saying as it was before, but we're able to move forward. And there's a certain gratitude in saying that, okay, we're able to move forward in life. So I think the last movement is really about gratitude. And this is a sentiment that's sometimes hard when you feel something that's been very difficult, to find the gratitude at the end of it. But I think human beings have a lot of gratitude in them. Sometimes we just we don't accept to let it out, you know, or we fight against ourselves. But especially coming out of the worst part, hopefully the worst part of what we've lived, then I really feel it. Yeah, exactly. I feel that. Anyway, I wanted to program something like that, so that we end the year with gratitude instead of ending the year with drama.
Well, I know that on behalf of all of my colleagues and friends and the staff and administration, that we all feel so much gratitude to everybody who is viewing this, who supported us, and you know, we certainly feel this, you know, through screens. We like, I know you, like, this gratitude has crossed borders.
Something crossed the border.
And we're so incredibly grateful that all of you have been part of this season, that even though it's been a very unusual one and we've all had to be very flexible and to adapt, it's still also been a very memorable one. And I know that as I'm playing that last movement, that's something that I'm going to be holding in my heart. So,
True.
So I think when we're thinking about concerts, sometimes it's to give people the place to feel important emotions communally and collectively. And I think gratitude is exactly what we need to be feeling now.
Absolutely, and then communion together. And we're just so happy that you followed us through all of this, because the reason why we do these programs and where we play is for you. And I'm really grateful for my colleagues also to have been there all year and play.